Action eye, ready to gun.
Fire! Starboard battery!
While empires compete and collide for power and profit in the 17th century, one man, without a country, seeks to build a new one in the New World. Peter Minuit, the man behind the most famous real estate deal in the history of the world, the purchase of Manhattan for the Dutch in 1626, set sail over a merciless Atlantic Ocean to make history again. But this time, Minuit has a secret mission that will compete with the Dutch: to plant a Swedish colony in North America.
Down the floorboards now!
Minuit's team of courageous men risk their destinies aboard what would become one of the great ships of the colonial era, the KALMAR NYCKEL. In 1637, a Swedish expedition plans to establish a colony that would allow them to trade with Native Americans and turn a profit in the process by undertaking the first transatlantic voyage from Sweden to North America.
This is not your normal merchant voyage. This is a major trading expedition.
Sweden is having its golden age at this time.
Establishing an outpost in the Delaware Valley was essential for Sweden as a country. They wanted to make sure that they were in the race for trade in the New World.
If the colony is successful, the voyage will be very lucrative for the Swedes, all because of one small animal.
The fur of beavers was very fashionable in Europe at the time.
Beaver hats were all the rage.
Almost all of the beavers were extinct all over Europe, so they were desperately seeking for new markets. All the hats of the kings of the 17th century were all made of North American furs.
That was a main reason for the settlement, to get beaver pelts from which they would make felt hats.
This is where KALMAR NYCKEL comes in. In a lot of ways, KALMAR NYCKEL was an ideal ship for a colonial venture. It was a pinnace, this really versatile type of ship.
In late fall of 1637, Peter Minuit and Captain Jan Hendrickson van der Water sail the KALMAR NYCKEL out of Gothenburg, Sweden, and begin a journey to North America, where they hope to plant a colony for the Swedish Empire.
Voyaging in the 17th century was dangerous. You expected people to die on a transatlantic voyage.
And the KALMAR NYCKEL is setting out during a tumultuous season on a body of water that has a deadly reputation.
The storm that KALMAR NYCKEL faced in the fall of 1637 was a ship killer. Waves that are 40, 50, 60 feet high. That's most of the height of KALMAR NYCKEL's rig.
The North Sea, it's very cold, has some pretty impressive low pressure systems that come through there. That's storms, bad weather. They get out there and sure enough, they get kicked in the teeth. And then a big sea comes, it hits the bow of the ship. The front of the ship falls off, it's gone away.
Down to the floorboards now!
It takes a month to bring the damaged ship into the Dutch port of Texel, and another month for emergency repairs to be made. On December 31st, 1637, KALMAR NYCKEL continues the journey south to the Canary Islands, where the ship catches the trade winds and travels across the Atlantic. Out on the open ocean, the KALMAR NYCKEL faces new uncertainties every day.
The Atlantic was a wild west in the 17th century, a vast wilderness with weak rules, no sheriffs, and all kinds of bad dudes roaming freely, which puts the guns of the KALMAR NYCKEL in an entirely new light.
Pirates have been around as long as shipping has been around. Pirates tended to hang out in the areas where the most traffic was. Wherever the business was where the raiders would go.
Fire! Starboard battery!
With guns on board, the KALMAR NYCKEL is well prepared to defend itself, but the crew has to keep sailing 24 hours a day.
The crew is divided into two groups called watches, a port watch and a starboard watch.
4 hours on watch, 4 hours off watch. The sailors are cleaning the ship, making repairs, sewing sail. They have to steer the ship. They have to provide a lookout. When they get off of their 4-hour shift, they are exhausted.
In your off time, you have to do all the stuff like sleeping, eating, mending your clothes.
It was a very difficult life.
After almost 4 months and more than 7,000 miles since leaving Gothenburg, Sweden, Minuit stays on course for a pocket of land where he knows the Swedes can lay claim and set up a fort. The destination was a prominent outcropping of rocks on the banks of what is now Wilmington, Delaware.
It was hidden about 2 miles off the main Delaware River, hidden from prying Dutch or English eyes.
In March 1638, Minuit's expedition splashes down at the rocks.
Minuit was very familiar with the waterways and how the Native Americans used them for trade. So he knew where to go in order to call the leaders of the Lenape tribe over to negotiate for land.
This was a very, very spiritual place for our people. And to have the Swedes arrive in this place was just significance of the Creator bringing these two cultures together. So we welcomed them.
Minuit knew that it was about the relationships he could develop with the natives.
After Minuit showed the native Lenape the goods the Swedes would trade for land and valuable beaver pelts, a treaty was signed on March 29, 1638. New Sweden now claims a 40-mile stretch of land south of the Christina River and the 27 miles of land north of the Christina River, reaching up to the Schuylkill River in today's Philadelphia. KALMAR NYCKEL's crew of sailors and soldiers begin the construction of Fort Christina, named for the 12-year-old Queen of Sweden.
Fort Christina was the first permanent European settlement in the entire Delaware Valley. The fort is built pretty rapidly, and by early June, Minuit is already on the voyage home. He's bringing a second voyage with more trade goods and more settlers to begin to populate this new colony.
Minuit's voyage back to Sweden included a side trip to the Caribbean island of St. Kitts. Here he planned to stock up on tobacco, which would be very profitable in European markets.
So at St. Kitts, Minuit runs into a fellow sea captain who he knows.
Minuit and Captain Vanderwater are invited to dine on board another ship, the Flying Deer, while anchored in St. Kitts. But they had no idea what was bearing down on the Caribbean.
You can be having lovely weather, and 12 hours later, it's death and destruction.
August 5th, 1638, a hurricane pops up.
Many ships were washed out of this anchorage in this storm event.
Miraculously, the KALMAR NYCKEL and its crew weathered the storm. But the Flying Deer and its two pioneering visitors are gone.
The Flying Deer was lost. Peter Minuit and Vanderwater, they were washed out to sea with the Flying Deer, and none of them were ever seen again.
In the shadows of American history, New Sweden is an undeniable part of the story. Thanks to the remarkable journey of one visionary leader who left his mark on the banks of the Delaware River almost 400 years ago.
Minuit was kind of proto-capitalist. He was a free trader. He was an adventurer. He seems to have embodied a lot of what the legacy of New Sweden was.
Somehow it's been forgotten over time because there was never any major battle fought with the New Sweden colony. The takeover by the Dutch was a bloodless battle. So somehow it kind of just dropped out of American consciousness.
It just doesn't fit into our normal picture of the American narrative that has one pole in Plymouth and another pole in Jamestown. And the Swedish story in the Delaware Valley reminds us that American colonial history is not nearly as simple as we make it out to be.